Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. And since the audience is all over the world, Thanksgiving is an American holiday, but the concept and idea of Thanksgiving is a very universal one, even very Jewish. As a matter of fact, for us Jews, Thanksgiving is every day, just as Father's Day and Mother's Day is every day, and only Tisha B'Av is once a year. Okay. Because every morning we actually wake up in the morning and we say Thanksgiving. We give thanks. Moda ani lefanecha. Thank you. We acknowledge the return of our soul and the beginning of a new day, renewal of our contract for one more day. And many, many places in Jewish thought, the idea of a carbon toida in the time of the temple, there was an offering that was actually a thank you offering, a Thanksgiving offering. And thank yous and Thanksgiving is replete throughout Judaism because it's really the acknowledgement of the blessings and gifts that were not self-made, not self-contained. There are different people or God or different circumstances that led us to a certain place, and it's a beautiful sign of modesty and humility is not to take for granted your gifts. And often once we get what we want, not everybody always remembers the roots of how we got there. So the idea of acknowledging those roots, acknowledging that which brought us to a certain place, is a beautiful thought. So Thanksgiving is in that spirit. In previous years, I've discussed the power of saying thank you, what it means on a spiritual level, psychological level, even to people that we love, people who we assume sometimes don't even need to hear thank you. Not necessarily the case. As in the summer, I gave a class called "Love Means having to say you're sorry," as opposed to the cliche that was made popular by a film in the early 70s. That means you don't have to say you're sorry. The fact is that love means you do have to say you're sorry, because even the people that are closest to us, should we hurt them, it's important to always acknowledge. It's not just for strangers' manners. It's also, maybe even more so, for those that are closest to us, because they're the easiest to take for granted. And the same thing is with thank you. Thank you is not just for strangers or people you don't know, but also for people that are close to us. And the most refined people I've always seen always said thank you to everyone who opened a door for them, to a waiter, to people. Often you see people just step over those that serve them, thinking since we pay them or because we're more special, we don't acknowledge the fact that they helped us. There's actually a statement in the Talmud that says, Cham l'mara tivusa l'shakya, which means the wine belongs to the owner, but the thank you is to go to the waiter. So even though the waiter that waits on you and delivers the bottle or the cup of wine, a glass of wine, it didn't create the wine, and he didn't produce the wine, he's just delivering it, but the fact is, he brought it to you. So it's a constant sense of acknowledgement of those gifts and blessings and everything around us. So I've discussed this theme at length. What I want to talk about in this class is something a little more my style, a little more on the, let's put, darker side. Okay, there's the darker side of the holidays. On one end, holidays people look forward to because of vacation, taking off from work, getting out of the grind and out of the routine, visiting family and friends, and so on. Now, I grew up in a relatively functional home, and I say relatively because they say today everything is dysfunctional one way or the other, but there's more than there's definitely more extreme than other. And it was surprising to me the first time I heard people who don't look forward, who dread the holidays, who dread the idea of going back home and sitting over for dinner. And it was explained to me by the people who did dread it that you have to remember our family was always unhealthy. It was a nightmare living there. And holidays were the worst part, because holidays was when the veneer and the facade came out in full force, where we were forced to smile and pose and make believe we're a very intact family and so on. It was just a masquerade. Now, I don't know how many people necessarily identify with that description of their home and family and holidays, but I heard it from enough people to know that it's not a small number. Now, to that extreme, I'm sure there's not everyone to that extreme. So, when I did a radio show called the Toward a Meaningful Life radio show in the early part of this century, I like to say that, right? The beginning of the millennium, actually, as well, like 2001, I think I did it. When was it? The late 90s. It was actually the late 90s and early. So one of the topics that I did was to be one of the most popular, was a live radio show. It was called, in connection to Thanksgiving. It was actually my co-host suggested it, which was when home doesn't feel like home. So you always hear the warm, heartwarming stories about Thanksgiving or other holidays, people going home and returning to their roots and all the beautiful stories and so on. But for many, home doesn't feel like home. And as I said, through the years of my teaching and counseling and meeting people, I came to discover that it's not that simple to just take for granted that we all have or grew up in intact homes. Hence, the title of this discussion here is The Broken Nest. Some Thanksgiving, Kislev, and maybe Parsha Toldot Ponderings. Kislev is coming up this Shabbat. This Shabbos we will bless the new month of Kislev, which concludes at the end of the month with the holiday of Hanukkah, which, as we all know, is really finding light within darkness. That's the story of Hanukkah. And we read this week's chapter, which is also a battle between light and darkness, and broken homes and intact homes. So, under one long big umbrella, we're calling it the broken nest. Now, one of the saddest scenes that one ever can see, and I remember seeing it myself as a child, is watching a bird return to its home, to its nest, and discovering that the nest is gone, is missing, or damaged. It's heartbreaking to see how the bird begins initially looking around, where are its maybe chicks, where is the nest. And it's a sad sight because in a way it also reminds us of the idea of all of us looking at our nests and our homes and our hearths, places that should be nurturing and not necessarily always there. So I thought it's appropriate to ask that question. People think about home, family when it comes to holiday season. That good topic to address this topic of the nest that we build. So let's first discuss the importance of a home and the importance of a healthy environment. See, on a very basic level, we live in a hostile world. What does hostile mean? Hostile means that number one, very, 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 at a very physical level, think of the elements. When man and human beings began to build homes, whatever level of homes, it was really the first thing is to protect shelter from the storm, shelter from the elements, whether it was the seasons, whether it was the wild habitat, animals, other dangers around. So a home was meant to be a type of shelter, a protection, an oasis. But when you think about it, the home is much more than just, we'll call it more than just a house. Shelter we can find in many different ways. You can find a shelter that's not necessarily a warm environment. You can have a roof over your head, you can have the bare minimum, they actually call them shelters, that just protect you. A bomb shelter is a shelter. There are shelters, God forbid, for homeless people. People who have no other place to go to. So the bare minimum is not necessarily what we'd call a home. So in Jewish thought, mystical thought, the concept of a home actually originates, not even from the human being, originates from God. One of the classic expressions in describing the purpose of existence is a medrash that says that God desired to have a home. The word is home, a dira, a home, in this hostile material world. And from there we understand the concept where we talk about in the Torah the story of the building of the temple of the Mishkan. The Mishkan was a home for God, a divine home. From there it evolved that each of us, each human being created in the divine image, also has a need for a home. As a matter of fact, the Talmud says that a human being without a home is not a complete human being. Could even say not even a human being. Think of it. Think of a person without a home. There's a certain element of what's the word I want to use? of lack of civility, a lack of like a wild animal roaming in the wild. Home is more than just, as I said, shelter. It's also the idea of you have a place to rest your head, a place that you can find comfort, that you can express yourself. When you're out in the wild, whether it's the wild of animals or the wild of humans, a lot of your energy has to go on protecting yourself, while looking over your shoulder to make sure that you're not hurt. So there's a certain level of alertness, a certain level of vigilance, and energy that has to be invested in protecting ourselves. And even in our civil world, hey, the workplace is a battlefield. And some of your friends who become your competitors or become even your co-workers may be also at the same time vying for the same position. So we expend a lot of energy of creating, protecting ourselves, preempting, and so on. Maybe not quite like a war with artillery and ammunition, but still psychologically, that's the state of being when you're out in the street, so to speak. What is the true nature of a home? The true nature of a home should be a place where all that doesn't exist. It's not a war zone, not a battle zone. It's a place where you can rest your head, knowing that you could sleep peacefully. You don't have to be looking over your shoulder. You don't have to be worrying that someone's going to intrude or invade inside your personal or inner sanctum. So really, it's not just a physical thing, it's an emotional, psychological thing. The idea that you have a place that's yours, where you can just be yourself. Now, of course, this doesn't just mean the physical abode, it also means the people in the home create such an environment. Very often you hear anyone growing up in a dysfunctional home, very often descriptions like war zone. I would wait when my parents came home. I never would know if my alcoholic father was in a good mood or was in a bad mood, and whether my mother was available or was not available. So children begin to develop vigilant and very ultra-sensitive tools to pick up the signals. They can't just take for granted that their home is a loving and natural and nurturing environment. Now, all of us can relate to that. Obviously, there are extreme cases where the home is absolute hell and anything but nurturing. But then there are also homes where it's not that predictable. And for a child especially, stability is critical. Stability means something you can rely on, something that's consistent. One of the worst things, even worse than having someone that's your enemy, is not knowing whether they're your enemy. Because if you know someone is the known enemy, at least you know. But if you don't know, one day they're your friend, one day a person who loves you hurts, and the next day they hurt you, that inconsistency creates a tremendous turmoil, upheaval in the human psyche that is very, very disturbing. Because you almost can't rely on anything. You can't build on anything. You can't develop trust. Trust is built on consistency and accountability. It's not built on perfection. When you don't have that consistency and accountability, it creates a very volatile environment, which is essentially maybe not a war zone, but it's close to definitely not a calm zone. So when you really identify the concept of a home, as I said, dira in Hebrew, exactly what God wanted is what we want. A place that you really can find true harmony, true solace, true comfort amidst all the hostilities and all the darkness and all the corruption around us. And that is already something that, of course, is quite a blessing and something to aspire to. And when we don't have it, it has dramatic impact. Sometimes actually, if you want to really appreciate something, it's important to see the contrast. Like the eclipse of the sun can teach us more about sunlight than the sun itself can, than sunlight can. If you want to appreciate health, really appreciate, I said thanksgiving, to thank and acknowledge. If you want to really appreciate health, you have to also look at what it means not to be healthy. God forbid. You see someone struggling to breathe in a hospital on the respirator or other type of need of assistance, you suddenly realize, hey, this is a pretty big miracle. You start thinking how many dynamics have to be working perfectly for a person to breathe smoothly. You'd be shocked of how many different factors have to be working. And so you appreciate it by the contrast. If someone asks, what does health feel like? What does health look like? The answer is, it doesn't look or feel like anything. As a matter of fact, if it does have a sensation, you usually need a doctor. Because health is supposed to be as seamless as breathing, where there's no impediments and there's no feeling. It's a feelingless sensation. It just, things are working. As soon as there's a feeling, it means that something is, like there's some type of experience going on. So even right now, as we often try this experiment, and it's a good thought experiment, and that is that like right this, in a second from now you'll see what I'm focusing on. But right now, what is your left leg doing, for example? So until I mentioned that, you probably weren't thinking about it, because it's just there. It's just as alive as it was there before you're conscious of it, then after you're conscious of it. In other words, health is actually doesn't feel like anything. And as soon as you do feel something, it means that, if you felt something in your left leg that made you think about it, it means there's something going on there. An itch, a pain, a nerve, something like that. So the healthiest things in life actually are very easy to take for granted, precisely because they're invisible to us. They're not that conscious, or conscious at all. Sadly, to appreciate a real nest, you have to see what a life without a nest is like. And unfortunately, today it's not that difficult to find situations of us growing up in broken or dysfunctional nests, and the effect that it has on us, which is, as I said, number one, that you grow up with a sense of constantly having to be hypersensitive, not knowing where the next next enemy or the next darkness is lurking. Obviously doesn't help if you don't have the nurturing of your and self-confidence, self-esteem that focuses on what you're really good at. And there are many far-reaching implications. Across the board, I would say that almost any situation that you're dealing with, any time someone has a problem, one thing you have to always look at is what home they grew up in. It's not the only factor. Sometimes there are definitely other factors that are maybe even more important, but it's always a factor. Because even if there are factors that are not directly connected to family and home, but family and home either exacerbate it or make it better. How we solve problems. Where do we learn how to solve problems? We all will face problems in our lives. We'll all have challenges. Nobody's not going to have a setback. How do you deal with a setback? To protect ourselves from no setbacks is impossible. There's no such miracle. So how do you deal with it? You've learned from young age how your parents dealt with it. That's usually how we deal with a problem. So the problem may not come from your home, but how you deal with it or don't deal with it does. So there's so many factors, so many elements, so many ingredients to how we make choices and how we love and how we relate to people and how we open up and trust and all that. It's all directly linked to the nest. So it's a very fundamental subject matter. So we have here in the Torah, of course, seeing that it's so fundamental, the Torah being a blueprint for life, should be telling us, and it does tell us, what a good home looks like and what a bad home looks like. So we have in this week's chapter a great case study. We have a great case study, the study of this home of Isaac and Rebekah. And the chapter begins, Ve'ele Toldot Yitzchak ben Avram. These are the offspring. Toldot in Hebrew means offspring, sometimes it means fruit. It can be the products, but Toldot also means children. The offspring, these are the offspring of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Abraham gave birth to Isaac. And then it continues how Isaac at the age of 40, at the age of 40, married Rebekah, which was a relative of his, a cousin. And then it talks about how they both prayed for a child. And the story continues that Rebekah became pregnant, but her pregnancy was very unique. It was very painful, actually. Very painful. It says, but the children inside of her wrestled. They struggled. And she was wondering and prayed to God to tell her, why is she having such a difficult pregnancy? And I guess from that you can extrapolate that she must have consulted with someone who didn't have such a difficult pregnancy. because she didn't have a point of reference. This was her first children. And God responds to her, says like this, says, because you carry inside you, not just two children, but two nations that will, in all of history, be at each other's throats. And when one will rise, the other will fall. And the other one will rise, the first one will fall. And this is what you're carrying, these two children. So they're struggling inside of you. And so it was, the children were born, the twins. Esav comes out first. A few minutes later, Yaakov, actually holding on to the heel of Esav, which is why his parents called him Yaakov. Yaakov in Hebrew, Akev is a heel. I know you must be thinking, what kind of parents would call their child a heel? Heel has other meanings also today in slang. But the heel, regardless, a heel is like not exactly a very endearing name. Reminds you of that song, The Boy Called Sue, right? There's a Jewish take on it too. They did it, a boy called Zlata, I think, or sure, right? The Rechnes Rejects, so one of these Jewish groups, did a parody on that song. But regardless, these two children are born, and the Torah describes them. That Esav was covered in hair, you could see was a person very, what's the word for it? Very energetic. And Yaakov was born much more docile, more a peaceful child. And as they grew into adults, the Torah says, "Vayigdul anarim," they grew up. The children grew up. That's exactly what happened. Esav became Ish Tzayid, Ish Melchama Yodei Tzayid, man, a warrior, a hunter. And Jacob is described Ishtam Yeshiv Ahalim, the honest, the simple, the wholesome one, the man of the books. Yeshiv Ahalim literally means the one who sat in the tents, but it means that he was a scholar. See, I couldn't get two opposites: the warrior, the hunter, the wholesome scholar. One went out conquering, invading, hunting, the warrior, and the other remained inside the tents, internal. His mind focusing on scholarship, on prayer, spirituality, and so on. And there's much to be said about these two brothers. Again, this is a topic I've discussed many times at length, especially the subsequent subsequent story, which is very bizarre, about the birthright and the blessings. But I don't want to go into that again. If you're interested in that topic, it's very easy to find stuff on our website, in meaningfullife.com, articles. And now we're also reorganizing, thank God, finally, our entire videos. So we have there like maybe 4 years of video classes like this that have all been recorded. And now we're finally putting up, they were always there, but it was a primitive platforms, is how one would call it. We've upgraded it just this last few weeks. So beginning this evening, actually, is the first webcast that we're doing here that actually can be seen on every device possible. From Macs to iPods to iPads to Androids to what else is out there? The gamut. So that's good to hear because we've been struggling with that, but we finally figured it out. Good. So you can also find the archives; they're all available. But what I'm focusing on here is more the home that they built. So I hear Isaac and Rebecca, two tzaddik and tzidkanis, definitely righteous people, each in their own beautiful way, have these two children, and they love their children, and they're twins, and they couldn't be two more opposites. So here you have all the ingredients, all the components of obviously good drama, right? Two twins, two brothers, opposites, and the drama is exactly what happens. Our drama would be an understatement. They do go to war with each other because for all the reasons, they have different personalities, they value different things. To the point where, as the story continues, Jacob outwits Esav, and Esav comes home one day hungry, famished from hunting, and he's hungry and ravenous. And Jacob was in the middle of creating and stirring a very called gishmaka, a very tasty stew. And of course, Esav got a smell of it, and looked at it. He realized this is a stew he would want. Jacob saw an opportunity, and he made a deal. They made a deal. The deal was that I'll give you a stew if you sell me your birthright. And he buys the birthright from him. And the story doesn't end there. That's one. Then later, Isaac is getting older. As he gets older, and he lost his sight, he asks Esau to come and bring him a meal, and then he's going to bless him. Well, when Rebecca hears that, she tells Jacob quickly, "You go prepare the meal. I'll help you. Dress up in garments, so if your father touches you, he'll feel like you have the same hairy, warrior-like person like your brother." And Jacob basically steals the blessings. Now, I know these are provocative stories, and we all would love to hear more about them, but as I said, I've discussed this at length, I believe last year and last few years. What I'm describing now is clearly a lot of volatility, a lot of upheaval in this family. Jacob, at the end of this chapter, is forced to run away and to escape to... that's where he runs off to Haran, Jacob, in the next week's chapter, for 20 years, where he builds his family and he marries Leah and Rachel, and the whole story continues. Then finally, in the chapter following next chapter, they reconcile. But he runs because one of the main reasons he runs, besides finding a shidduch, is also running for his life from Esau. Maybe there's lessons to be learned from that when you're ready to run for your life, you may find your soulmate. When you're that desperate. But the bottom line is that clearly this is not a peaceful situation. So it couldn't have given a lot of nachas and joy to the parents. And at the same time, these were very healthy and wholesome parents. They were holy people. They were, as I said, righteous, giving, growing up in homes. Rebecca may have grown up in a home that wasn't the best type of home, but she herself was a gem. She herself was as I said, an unbelievable soul. So it's a good model, or case study rather, of a home. This is a nest. Now, the interesting thing is that they both play a role, both Yaakov and Esau. It's not a question of favoritism, where one is a special and the other one is a second-class citizen. Rebecca loved her son. The reason for the blessings, as I discussed in previous years, was very good intentions. It was not about trying to deceive or to steal away the blessings from Esau. It was a matter of harnessing them. But the question is, what kind of, if they grew up in such a beautiful nest, what happened? So clearly, in this situation, prior to the nest, already in their mother's womb, it doesn't get more nurturing than a new womb. They were already fighting. So it was not about their home at all. Their struggle was a cosmic one that preceded the home. Their home could have been the most beautiful one, but they happened to be at odds with each other. But the lesson that we have from this is, number one, of course, that a home is only part of it. Obviously, you can have the best home, and still people can grow up and make their choices that are not always the healthiest choices. But the bottom line is that at the end of the story, Esau and Jacob do reconcile. And then the story that really ends, which will be the end of the Messianic age, the Talmud tells us and the commentaries tell us that these two brothers will make peace. And in many ways, Jacob representing the Jewish nation, Esau represents the Western Roman Christian world. So though for thousands of years, for a long time, they've been at war with each other, they will ultimately make peace. And that's because they came from a peaceful place in the first place. And their home was a healthy home. So the end of the story is actually a good ending, even though they go through their stages. So it's not a complete, model for many homes that we find today, where the home itself is a problem. But nevertheless, it's a model in the sense of dysfunctionality and challenges that every one of us faces. I mentioned as well that at the beginning of this Shabbos we bless the new month of Kislev. So Kislev is the month that is most known for the conclusion of the month, the holiday of Hanukkah, which we will shortly talk about as we get closer to it. But I want to just point out the following. In the Kabbalah, when it talks about the month Kislev, it breaks the word into two parts. Kos loy, which means a cover for him. In other words, it refers to a covering. The story of Hanukkah, essentially, is, as you all know, you probably know, is that the Greco-Syrians had defiled the temple, and there was no olive oil, any pure olive oil left to light the menorah, until they discovered miraculously one little crucible of oil, and they lit it, and it burned not just for, even though it was only enough for one day, it burned for 8 days. Now, straight to the point, the message of it is that even in the deepest darkness, you can find a pure cruse of oil. Even in our, no matter what we go through in life, we have inside of us a pilot flame, and when you ignite it, you light it, miracles do happen. So it's basically about discovering light within darkness, and hence the name of the month Kislev, cover. It's a covering. We live in a material world which conceals and covers its deeper personality. When you meet somebody, we do judge a book by its cover. We don't see an inner soul, the inner light, because light is easily concealed by the outer surface of the material world. Cover, lakos. But within there, if you dig deep enough and you are persistent, you can find deep reservoirs of light. So in essence, the concept of whatever home we grew up in, whether it was a healthy home or not, a broken nest or not, everything is an opportunity. And there's no such thing, essentially in Judaism, of a lost case, of damaged goods, to the point where there's no hope. It's sometimes very difficult, sometimes takes a lot of work, but there's no such thing. The flame never burns out. What can burn out is our confidence in the flame, or our persistence, or our willingness to fight and to see it through. But the flame never burns out, which is why it's so critical, even at the darkest moments, to always hold on to some form of faith or trust, because that's what can help you get through the darkest moment when you can't see, and you just go based on faith. But then, finally the light begins to emerge. That's the real power of faith, to carry us through times when you have nothing but faith. And it carries you through to be able to ultimately discover the light. How many breakthroughs may have happened in our lives had we just seen it through, had we waited a bit, had we persisted a bit more? Now, of course, the challenge is, how do you know when to persist and when to give up, when to move on? That requires, of course, a little discretion, a lot of discretion, and wise counsel. Sometimes we're not objective on our own. But the fact of the matter is, there are many, many opportunities, situations, especially when it comes to fundamentals, like discovering love. When anyone asks me, there are people who have asked me very often, maybe I'll never find my love in my life. Maybe there is no soulmate for me. Years have passed, I've tried so hard, I'm already older, whatever age that may be, and people give up. When it comes to fundamentals like that, there's no question that to give up is an absolute mistake. There are areas that maybe you're barking the wrong tree, maybe that's not the right person for you, maybe that's not the right place to go to, not the right particular advice you're getting. But the concept of finding love in your life is a divine right, by a birthright of every human being. It would be just like someone saying that there's no way I will ever actualize my potential. There are fundamentals that all of us have been given as a blessing and a gift to be able to actualize. The fact that we haven't found a solution simply means we haven't done enough, or we may be doing the wrong things. We may be our own worst enemy. So regardless of what kind of home you grew up in, obviously there's much more challenges when a person did not have a nest, a nurturing nest, a place, as I described earlier, the true nature of a home where you are able to feel completely nurtured and comfortable. Definitely it stacks the deck and makes it more difficult, but it doesn't make it impossible. It doesn't make it impossible because, as I said earlier, and I'll elaborate some more now, because the fact is that we all, created in the divine image, have the same desire and have the same right as God Himself, who said, I want to have a home in this world. Now, does God have a home in this world? It's a very good question. We live in a world where people kill each other, that divisiveness, to the point of, as I said, of even death and murder and corruption and greed and so on. Is God comfortable on this earth? One could argue, and many philosophers have argued, that God created the universe, maybe, but He took off, and He's not coming back so fast, because this place is not conducive for anything that is divine. If you ever saw the film George Burns playing God, Oh God, also in the 70s. If you haven't seen it, it's a pretty good film to see. So basically, it's somewhat of a humorous story about how God appears to just a Joe Schmo in America, and tells him that I want you to bring a message to the world that they're screwing up my plan, and it's time to get their act together. I mean, that's essential. And of course, this I think it's John Denver, who is the guy, and he basically is incredulous, doesn't accept the idea that God's coming to him. The whole thing seems like a hoax. But there comes a point where he finally accepts the fact, and this is his mission. I mean, it's hilarious and so realistic of how obviously nobody believes him, and everyone thinks he's insane. Which, of course, begs the question, points out, emphasizes to us all, even people who claim they believe in God, they really believe in it. When push comes to shove, if someone told you that God came to them and told them to go and give a message to the world to get their act together, would you believe it? Now, obviously, there are many con artists out there. But the bottom line, the end is an excellent end. Finally, George Burns is so exasperated because his messenger is not able to succeed. So the final scene there is you see George Burns' God dressed in a safari outfit, and he says, I had enough with the human race. I'm off to the woods. I'm going back to the natural wild, where the creatures do as they were created to do. They don't transgress. They don't waver, and they don't deviate from the plan. And it's just interesting observation. So at this point, John Denver, the fellow, he already became close with God. They have these conversations, these intimate, long conversations. So he says to God, I'm going to miss you. I want to have some conversations with you. So the last line, I believe, is God says to him, you know what, you speak and I'll listen. That's the conclusion. Which, makes you think, interesting. And there are actually philosophies, especially in the early years, that believe that God and this universe are not reconcilable. They just cannot coexist. This is a world where self-interest and greed and corruption and all that brings to, which is divisiveness, war, bloodshed, and all the horrors that human beings can perpetrate against each other, is not a world that is too hostile for the divine. So maybe God rests in the heavens, in the stars, in paradise, somewhere out there in the spiritual realms. But this earth is not the place. Then, of course, there's the other argument that there is no God altogether. Everything is survival of the fittest. What does Judaism teach? Judaism teaches, like this story in this chapter, that your job is to come down to this earth, and no matter how it appears, how dark it appears, and how cruel people can be, there is a light in here somewhere. And we have the power and the ability to reveal that light. So Rebecca and Isaac built as best home as possible. But Jacob and Esau reflect the reality of the archetypes of struggle. This is not heaven. In heaven there are no struggles. When our souls are in heaven before they enter your body and they come down to this earth, you don't have to eat or sleep or have aggravation or anxiety or pain. There's no therapy. Everything is the way it's supposed to be. It's similar to like the animals in the wild. Not quite, because they still live on this earth, but it's a certain serenity. It's like 24/7 serenity. Quite boring, actually, right? It's not very exciting. Just constantly experiencing beauty and so on. There's never angst and stuff like that. And that's why, as the mystics explain, a Hasidic thought elaborates, souls in heaven, when I say heaven, I don't mean heaven up there, it's a dimension, don't fulfill a true purpose, because they don't have any challenges. It is when you come down to this world, you're born, you're conceived, and your soul enters into a body. And the body has its aches and pains, and has its needs, and will go through aging and health issues. And then, of course, add into the equation meeting and growing up in environments that are not always so healthy. And then you have to contend with it. As I always emphasize here, how much is going on inside that little mind and heart of yours? How many demons and ghosts haunt us? Fears, known fears, unknown fears, legitimate fears, non-legitimate fears. There's so much happening. And especially, as I said, growing up in a nest that wasn't perfect, it really tremendously impacts your entire life. And we don't have much peace in this world. Yet this is the purpose, and this is where God said, I want a home. And this is where we have the power to build our home. And that's precisely the power, to build a nest in a hostile place, not to build a nest where it's comfortable. So here you have in this week's chapter, Rebecca and Isaac, great people. But their home reflected the reality of life, a struggle. The purpose being to obviously prevail. The purpose being to find a peace between spirit and matter. But initially, spirit and matter are at war with each other. Jacob and Esau, spirit and matter. The warrior and the scholar. We all have within us two voices. We all have the warrior in us. That usually develops as we get a little older and we become more mature. We start seeing that we need to know how to fight. We need how to protect ourselves. We develop our fangs, our defense mechanisms. Some people really master the art. And then there's another side to us, which is truly, really more the domain of when we're younger. And less and more vulnerable, when we don't have the warrior to protect us. And that's the innocent Ishtam Yeshiv Aholin, the scholar. A scholar, I mean to say, the person, the wholesome, inward, spiritual type of person. Can a spiritual person survive in this harsh world? It's a big question. You see people with good intent and good sweethearts, kind people, get very hurt in this world because people take advantage and they could be naive. Even if they're not naive, you don't always, when you're a good person, it's hard for you to project of how cruel or how selfish people can be. And often good people get hurt. So one could argue, as I just argued earlier, philosophically, same psychologically, that you really can't your soul can't really coexist with the harsh world. And indeed, the patriarchs, what profession did they choose? They chose to be shepherds. They were shepherds. And the Hasidic teachings, they write that why did they choose to be shepherds? Because they did not want to enter into the Wall Street or occupy Wall Street world, and they wanted to, so to speak, somewhat be separate from the travails and the struggles of the marketplace. Shepherd is a perfectly conducive type of work where you can be in a peaceful environment. Sheep are very docile, cooperative. They graze, while the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, could meditate, could pray, could study the meadows and the fields and nature. Who is the first person in the story of the ongoing story of the biblical story that's thrust into the business world, so to speak, to the dark, harsh world? Joseph. We'll read about him in a few weeks from now. The son of Jacob, who we read about now. Against his will. Joseph was also a shepherd at an early age. But then at age 17, due to the jealousy of his brothers, they almost kill him. They end up selling him into slavery. He ends up in Egypt. And he becomes the first of all things. Mark, you'll appreciate this. So Mark. The first Jewish accountant. Right. There you go. On cue. And the second one is Mark. No. Close second. Distant second. He becomes the first Jewish accountant. Literally, it says, when Potiphar, recognizing his skills, once he was sold into slavery and bound down to Egypt, he appoints him to run his books. So now the first time you have one of the patriarchs, not a patriarch, son of a patriarch, one of the tribes, who ends up being not a shepherd. But the plot thickens. The story continues that Joseph then again, because of that whole the seduction or the attempted seduction by Potiphar's wife, Joseph is thrown into prison. Finally gets out of prison because he interprets the dreams of Pharaoh correctly, and then gives the brilliant advice to stock up on the grain during the years of famine, during the years of plenty, so there should be enough stockpiled for the years of famine. As a result, he becomes the viceroy of Egypt and is in charge of this whole grain, manufacturing and storage and trading and selling and so on. This turns Egypt into a superpower because it was the only nation, the only country that had grain. And it's when Israel and everywhere around, they all had to come by grain, and that's when Egypt rose. So here, Joseph was completely thrown into this business world, in the fullest sense of the word. So the question is asked, what was the impact? Was Joseph compromised in the process? His parents and grandparents all chose to be shepherds. He was thrust in against his will, but he was there. Who ends up being the most spiritual of them all? It's a very good question. So it says, when finally, 22 years later, and Jacob and Joseph reunite, the end of the story, so Jacob recognizes that Joseph, through all these years, did not lose his integrity, because he remembered what they studied before Joseph was torn away from him. And what's explained is that Joseph, in many ways, is even greater than the patriarchs, because they isolated themselves. They built their own little nest, and they stayed away from, as much as possible, from the hostilities of the world around them. Joseph was right in the eye of the tornado, smack in the middle of one of the most corrupt and depraved countries in the world, Erves Haaretz, and yet he maintained his spiritual integrity. That, of course, is a much greater achievement, because he had real challenges. As a matter of fact, there's an example given to us from a book called, from the Middle Ages, Seder Hayom. He comes to explain a Talmudic statement. Jews pray 3 times a day: morning, afternoon, evening, Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv. So the Talmud says like this: L'olam yehi adam zoher b'tfilas hamincha. A person should always be careful, especially take care with the middle afternoon prayer, mincha, the afternoon, the shorter prayer. Because Elijah the prophet, his prayers were answered during the mincha prayer. So the question is asked. The mincha prayer seems to be, you can't say one is greater or weaker, but each has their advantage. But of the 3 prayers, the mincha prayer seems to be the weakest of the 3. You don't say Shema. It's a quick prayer. It's short. The morning prayer seems to be the one that would be the longest one in the morning, putting on tefillin, talis, and so on. The evening prayer is at the end of the day, Shema. So the Seder Hayom says something very powerful. And it's an unbelievable lesson in our building our nest, and also dealing with our challenges. He says that the afternoon prayer has the advantage that's right in the middle of the day. It's one thing to begin your day praying before you immerse into the work, into your job. It's another thing. It's also relatively easier to pray at the end of the day after work, before you go to bed or in the evening. But to tear yourself away while you're in the middle of your work day, afternoon, and suddenly say, I have to do something else, which is not exactly part of your work, something spiritual, something divine, to pray, that is the achievement. Similar to Joseph, as I mentioned, that smack in the business world, where there is so much corruption and potential corruption and so on, to have integrity there, that is achievement. They tell the story I'll share 2 stories. One story of one of the great Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, and he happened to also be a businessman, a successful businessman, but he was a great scholar, a very devout and very pious man. One says when he was doing his accounting, so he was like adding up at the end of the year what happened each month, income and expenses. I don't know if they called them P&L then, but whatever it was. And he counted, he said the month of Tishrei, whatever, January, this was the income, expenses. February, income and expenses. March, When he came to the last month, in Hebrew, the month of Elul, December, whenever the fiscal year ends, at the end, the sum total. What's the total of it all? So instead of writing a number, a figure, he wrote Ein Eid Milvade, which means there's nothing but God. So you had this page with every month had its numbers, and then at the bottom it said God, nothing but God. Because that was what he saw as being the total of it all. It's not money, it's God, higher purpose. So the question is asked: if he's such a devout spiritual man, how did he have the presence of mind to write numbers on each line? He should have written January equals God, February equals God, March equals God. He's a godly man. Why is he making calculations in the first place? The answer, of course, is that if he wrote God on each line, he shouldn't be in business. He should go to yeshiva. The fact is, a businessman, it means masa matem bamuna. He's doing his business faithfully. There's accounting to be given. But he never lost sight that that's just the means. The sum total of it all is God. And that's the achievement. For someone to just live in an oasis, on a mountain, in a cloud, and separate themselves like a shepherd from all the turmoil and the ups and downs and challenges of the workplace, that is nice, but it's not the purpose of existence. The purpose is to go right into it, and you do know the numbers, and you do know how to run your business, and still remember that it's not money that is the end of the story. It's God. It's a higher purpose. Another story I was going to mention was the Rebbe Rashav, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, whose birthday was last week, had a student who was a very good student, and then afterwards he went into business. The business he went into was galoshes manufacturing. Galoshes. In Russia, he made a lot of money because the streets were not paved. So you can imagine galoshes saved many a shoe. So he made a lot of money. He became very busy and very very successful business. After years, he came back to see his great Rebbe. The Rebbe gave one look at him, saw where his head was, and he said with a smile, he said in Yiddish, he said, Fissen galoshen aber gesehen, aber Koppen galoshen, which means feet in galoshes I have seen, but I've never seen a head in galoshes. So obviously his head wasn't physically in the galoshes, but his total immersion was there. So there's an expression, when you do business, do it b'loi lev v'lev, which means without your complete heart, but with your heart. It's like having your feet firmly planted on the ground, but your head should be in the clouds. That's hard to combine because it's a paradox. One could argue, it's easy, as I said earlier, to have God and live with God on the mountain. But to come down and have my feet on the ground and be realistic and deal with the real issues of life, besides the fact that it's very difficult not to get jaded and not to get affected by it in some way, how do you balance these two? But that is the purpose. And that is the challenge. To build a nest in a place where nests are not easily built. Not to build nests where it's comfortable and it's easy. That's the challenge. And it is to build a healthy marriage and a healthy home, a functional home. In our world, is not an easy matter. Very difficult. First of all, it's not common. It's become a rare commodity. Secondly, we are so inundated by so many of the comforts of our material lives and all the gadgets and so on. It depersonalizes us. In most homes, a television is on for 5-6 hours a day. That's what they say, statistics. Now, I'm not here to go into a fire and brimstone critique of television, but rest assured, television is not exactly helps building a nest. Great distraction. It's great entertainment. It's actually bringing the world outside into your home. So, when we should be going outside for those experiences. Now, I'm not taking away the beauties and the advantages of technology, of the internet. I use it, but like with the story with the guy who was writing the numbers in each line on God. Technology is a tool. It's just a very sophisticated tool. It's a very powerful tool. It's a very cool tool. But it's still a tool chest. It's no different than a hammer and a nail. It's no different than a screwdriver. As I said, it just achieves more, faster. It has more, a hammer isn't very glamorous. In the internet, technology can provide entertainment, social networking, it's got the whole works. And it's an addiction, there's no question about it. And when you don't have anything else that you're passionate about, it's very easy to replace it with the passion for the new latest, whatever, 4G, 5G, 6G, where are they up to? 4G now? Yeah?
I'm still caught up on the blueberry.
Okay, you're in the blueberry. Okay. Brownberry. Yeah. So, for me personally, I see technology as a great tool of distribution. You can reach people anywhere. You have a good message, you can reach them with the press of a button. It's amazing its power. But I also see how it destroys lives too. They talk about personalization, personalizing. And I always mention sitting in the car with that guy, and I try to get his attention. No, wait, because he's busy in his thing, busy texting. So I texted him. I'm sitting right near him. I texted him, and he looks at it, and he's like, I remember. He looks, and he says, "Who's texting me?" I said, "Why are you texting me? You're sitting right near me." So I said, "I'm sitting with you for an hour. I couldn't get your attention." I finally got his attention, only through texting. I found it quite interesting, Remember, what a mother does and a father when they cradle a newborn child, no technology will ever do. They can create all the virtual mothers in the world and fathers. They may be better than what we have in real life, but that's not saying much. You cannot create the nurturing that's necessary. Just like a hug is a hug. We'll ever be able to create a virtual hug and robots will hug us? I'm sure they'll come up with that soon. But there's more than just the technical aspect of it. There is a profound connection that is transcendent and cannot be quantified and cannot be captured in machines. So we have the two sides of us. And we live the side, there's the warrior, there's the soldier, and there's the angel. We have both sides. And there is a war. It's exactly the way it was meant to be. In the book of Tanya, one of the classic works of Hasidic thought, it makes the point, battle is the purpose of life. Not battle forever. You could win this battle, but the struggle is a parcel of the world that we live in. And it's difficult, but it's extremely gratifying and achieving much when you do build a nest. So those of us that have had challenges, growing up in broken nests, or homes that were not complete, that doesn't take away the same purpose. As a matter of fact, in many ways, you may be able to see by contrast what should be built by knowing what doesn't work well. But every one of us has a struggle in this regard. Whether people growing up in the healthiest world, in the healthiest homes, and those in less healthy homes. And Hanukkah in this month gives us the message as well that there's no such thing as a hopeless. There's light everywhere. It may be a small little cruise of oil, and maybe something that can only burn a day, but when you ignite it, when you access it, things happen. I have seen in my life miracles like that. I've seen people who everyone gave up on. They gave up on themselves. And then something happens, some spark of hope, something shakes them up, and you see unbelievable, amazing things. So first thing is, don't ever give up on yourself. And not just, on all of yourself, but even on part of yourself. Because we have an enormous amount of resources that remain trapped. And because, as I said earlier, so many of us have to develop sophisticated war tools to deal with the confrontations of life, that a lot of our other parts remain dormant. They remain quiet. They remain asleep. And it's critical to be able to. It's critical for your own sanity, for your own realization, realizing who you really are, is to find ways to nurture that part of ourselves. That's what a home does. And as I said, we'll discuss it more Hanukkah time, but Hanukkah actually has this contrast. It says, Al Pesach Beisim Bachutz, you light the menorah by the door facing outside. And the Talmud continues, and you light it when the sun goes down, as the sun sets. And the period of time when you're supposed to light Hanukkah menorah is until Ad Kalya Rigla the time of day, which means until the feet of the merchants or the people walking the street cease, which means until after the rush hour, basically. So at the end of the day, when the sun is setting, people are going home from work. So the period of lighting the Hanukkah menorah, today the time has been extended even later than that, but technically it was between the period of when the sun sets until the point where most people are not in the streets any longer, they're home. So in other words, right smack in the middle, in the street, the end of the workday, when the sun is setting, not when the sun is rising, in the darkness, that is the time when we light Hanukkah menorah. So Kislev's message, as I said, we're blessing the month of Kislev this week, the Shabbos. Kislev's message, similar to the message of Toldot, is that you can build offspring and you can build a home, even in the darkest of places. Next week, the chapter elaborates on that because Jacob ends up being in the darkest place of Haran, which means wrath, place of wrath, divine wrath. That's wrath as in W-R-A-T-H. That there, of all places, that's where Jacob builds his family, the tribes. So to take it back now to the opening discussion of our nests, the nests that we build. Birds fly. But to have the courage and to have the power to fly comes after a period of time where the bird is nurtured inside the nest. No bird flies in day one. No, there's stages. And you'll see it's in direct proportion. Those of us who are nurtured when we should be nurtured will fly when we have to fly. And when you're not nurtured when you should be nurtured, you won't fly when you need to fly. So you have the two opposite problems that are possible. A person remains too long in the nest and never flies, God forbid. Or you have someone that is thrown out of the nest too early and they start flying, they will not be able to have the comfort and confidence to truly fly. They tell the analogy of someone was once watching a chrysalis, a cocoon, slowly cracking open as after the gestation, after the period that the caterpillar spends inside the chrysalis, and the butterfly starts emerging. So it's a fascinating process, metamorphosis, that very much reflects all of our lives. We all go through such stages, more than once in our lives, where you begin one shape, adolescence in a way, and then you suddenly turn into an adult, and you can't even recognize what you were like before. The silliness or whatever it may be. So we go through this. So the the example. So a guy was seeing a butterfly struggling, as the cocoon starts opening, like the cracked egg. So it doesn't just crack open, it takes a little while. So as he's seeing the butterfly struggling and unable to get out of the cocoon. So he had compassion, a moment of compassion. And here, what you'll see is called the crime of compassion, actually. So he took a knife or scissors and he cut open the cocoon to let the butterfly out. What a noble act, right? Why should the butterfly struggle an extra second? But sadly, to his chagrin, as he looked closely, the butterfly would not fly. And the reason is because the pressure, the struggle of the butterfly trying to make its way out of the chrysalis, just look how the amazing design. The struggle the butterfly has to exert itself to get out of the cocoon forces liquid into its wings that give it the ability, what's it called? I forgot what it's called. In aviation, what the wings are? Huh?
Aerodynamic.
What? Thrust, the aerodynamic. There's a word for it. It'll come to me. But anyway, that thing that gives it the ability to fly. So because he was so compassionate and not let the butterfly struggle, because of the lack of struggle, the liquid never got into the wing completely, and the wings did not have the power to fly. And this butterfly was grounded for the rest of its life. So, just to demonstrate how struggle is part of the picture, obviously this does not mean that we have to struggle more than necessary. God should bless us all that our struggle should be to the minimum. But do not think that life you can never fly without the struggle. It's very much part of it. Even that's the word aerodynamic. What did you call it? Aerodynamic. Now, the reason I wanted to looking for the word is because very much part of when they the engineering of behind an airplane, which emulates essentially a bird or other flying creatures, was about how to find the right balance between the tension and between the lift. It's a whole science, and you cannot just have one without the other. A bird does it seamlessly and effortlessly, but it's not as simple as it seems. That's why it's a big feat to emulate. Why can't we just flap our hands and fly? It's not about our weight. There are birds that weigh more than human beings. There are very heavy birds. It's not about weight at all. It's about a balance between the weight and how to deal with the resistance of the air resistance and so on. I don't have the exact words for it, but it's a real feat in engineering. And of course, birds and butterflies have it naturally, each one in their own way. A butterfly more through fluttering, but it's not about because they defy just they're lighter than gravity. A bird or any animal is no lighter than gravity than we are. So the point of the matter is there is the need for that type of struggle that forces the liquid into our beings that allows us to fly. But then there's the second half of the story. Just as the butterfly has to get out and struggle to get out, there's also a period of time that if this noble gentleman decided to cut the chrysalis a month earlier, he would have killed the butterfly altogether. Because it needs that period. It's like a pregnancy. It's a metamorphosis. So there's a stage where we need to be grounded, where we need to be in our nest. And the more nurtured you are there, the more confidence you build. And you have the psychological wherewithal that when the day comes to fly, you'll have the confidence to fly. And whenever you look at any of these nature shows, no matter what species, whether it's animals in the wild, fish in the sea, birds in the sky, each of them have their own patterns and their own clockwork, so to speak. But you'll always see there's a state of a nurturing state, and there's the state when the mother sends the child away or the child grows old enough to go away. Now there are a few creatures that early stage of nurturing is almost immediate. A child is born and almost immediately is abandoned by its parent, but that's also part of the natural process. Remember, every child was in a pregnancy or was fertilized in an egg and so on. So I say this in context of our own lives. I'm sure everybody wants to fly, wants to soar, reach places you've never reached before. That's the nature of a human being, want to excel. And one of the many factors why we don't go there, why it doesn't happen. And it's not always because of capacity, ability to do so. Obviously, fear is a big factor. We're afraid. It's like a fear of flying. Maybe you go too high. It's easier. You're accustomed to being where you are, and as soon as you have to go new places, there's risks involved. So why risk it when you know you're secure where you are? But deeper than that is ultimately that the greater you build, the greater the nurturing during the time when you are in a stage where you are protected by those with parents, a home, a nest, the more confidence that is built and the courage to fly. You'll see the healthiest children in healthy homes, their parents did not just love them, they constantly fed them confidence. So in other words, when something went wrong, when a child did something wrong, yes, there's a measure of discipline, but they never demoralized the child to lose confidence in itself. And unfortunately, very often that's what happens. That even if a child did something wrong, the parents or the educators they disempower the child. So as you grow older, you begin to question yourself. Maybe not, maybe. The people who have the greatest courage are the ones that had that type of nurturing. When the nest was strong, so when they left the nest, they were able to fly to the greatest places. But I have to qualify this by saying, interesting irony, that also the other opposite is true. People who grew up in the worst type of homes also have a power to fly in very great places. Some attribute to Steve Jobs' genius was the fact that he did not really have his biological parents. And that from day one, he was always, in a sense, struggling to find himself. And you'll find others as well who really grew up in very harsh circumstances that also developed in them a certain intensity where they don't take their lives for granted. So it's interesting that, but I still, obviously, all of us would love to be able to say we have it, we get it in a loving way instead of from a difficult path. But difficulty does not limit the ability for a person to reach great heights. It's just more difficult and much rarer, because people who have been hurt in young age or have not had the confidence because they did not have the reinforcement and the security necessary in a healthy nest that gives you the strength is much more difficult It's not impossible, but it's more difficult. So no matter where we come from, the fact of the matter is, we live in a world and we should feel at peace with the fact that this is not a peaceful world. And it's never meant to be one. However, that doesn't mean you can't create peace in this world. There are hostile forces all the time, but you can create a hearth. You can create an environment that's peaceful in your space. And even when you're dealing with people who are obnoxious and provocative, and they provoke you and they instigate, etc., when you build your strength from within, you can even handle that. It doesn't mean you have to hang around with them all the time. But it does not mean that they control your life. How often does it happen that you wake up in the morning, you're all excited, you're in a good mood, you say, okay, today, no one's going to mess up my day. And within 5 minutes, God has other plans. Or 10 minutes, you get to work, and of all days, when you're such a positive mood, the wrong person walks into your door, the last person you want to meet. Or somebody is obnoxious, someone else is in a bad mood, and it destroys your whole day. Which really means that why are you not controlled? What do you mean? How could anyone else destroy your day? How could you even allow someone to destroy your day? Because it means we're vulnerable. It means we don't have it really, if things work out, and thank God there's no curveballs, thank God we had another good day. We all have to know that you are in control. It all comes from within. The people who have that inner peace, have that inner sense of confidence, can be in the middle of a storm, and it will not change them. Now, obviously, we're all humans, and you're going to react to things. Someone provokes you, or someone's hostile. But as you develop and you truly work on it, you can really come to a point where, not that you're oblivious to the point where you don't know what's happening. It's just that it doesn't affect you. That person, that's your problem, not my problem. I had to learn early on in my own so-called career this art, because people would come to me and speak to me about all kinds of stuff. Some of it was very hard to hear, some of it painful things, dark things, stuff. Honestly, I didn't even feel competent. I didn't even know why they were sharing it with me, because they trusted me. They heard something, so they thought maybe I have the wisdom to be able to say something. What I did was I listened well. I listened, I was sensitive. Sometimes I had something to say, sometimes I didn't, to be very honest. But what I learned was, which was very hard for me at the beginning, you really empathize. And when you empathize, it can really start draining you. In the psychology world, they call it transference. There's transference, there's cross-transference, there's even cross-transference. Don't try to figure it out, it's very complicated. There's a lot of crosses, they go on and on. And the fact of the matter is that when you dealing with someone and you're trying to help, there's sometimes you can over-identify, they over-identify with you. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on. And it's an art, especially if you're a sensitive person. If you're not sensitive, so you don't take things too seriously, it doesn't get to you. But I remember I was haunted sometimes by some people's lives. I was haunted by the darkness. I couldn't believe what they went through. It would really drive me crazy. And it took a long time and a lot of effort and work to create a boundary where I could be sensitive and empathize and not let it wasn't destroying my life, I could say, but it was like occupying. I was like you can cry for somebody and you start saying, it's the lack of fairness in life and all that type of stuff. But I came to learn that you don't have to, it's not either or. There's a way to have both of them. It's a difficult balance. It's much easier just to go one extreme or the next. But you learn to balance the two. And you learn exactly what I said here this evening, that the point is to come into a painful world and not deny the pain and not try to run away from it. Know it's there, look at it in the eye, and know that it can't kill you. And that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. No question about it. And then help people, because I realized in my situation, I realized that the more I could have that composure, that balance, I could help people find that balance. Because that's also what happens to ourselves with our own issues. Our own issues overwhelm us. And then, so either you're like the ostrich, you stick your head in the ground in denial, and there's no issue, or you minimize it, or you become so overwhelmed by it, you can't do anything. You become paralyzed. So finding that middle ground is not easy. To face an issue at the same time not be overwhelmed by it takes a lot of effort. But when you finally master it, and everyone is capable of it, what happens is you become control of your life. Because nothing can then, nobody, as I said, we all will have our setback, but generally speaking, people, their moods don't change who you are. I remember once, it was quite a humorous line, but especially in other contexts. I don't know if it'll come across well, but I'll try to explain it. It was a line from the Rebbe that he wrote about somebody that I worked with, that it was a very moody guy. And remember, the Rebbe wrote this line. He said in Hebrew, he wrote, "Eineni yochel li yistolei b'matzav ruach shel pleni." I cannot be dependent on the mood of somebody else. A mood of so and so, of Mr. Anonymous, of John Doe. And I remember the line is so powerful to me, because people who have focus, they can't spend the rest of their lives, adjusting and walking on eggshells because somebody's in the mood. Now, obviously, we're sensitive people. Someone you care about and you want to talk about, fine. But they can't become. You can't become paralyzed by another person's paralysis. So I wanted to devise a little. I guess it was a little gimmick. I don't know what to call it, a little game. So I was running my office, and we had a nice staff of people. And today it's a lot different because of internet. People can work long distance. But then you sat in the office and you actually saw human beings. Today, you could just sit and just deal with machines all the time. Or my machine talks to your machine type of thing. Try being interviewed on CNN, and you'll see what I mean. You sit in a room and you have cameras moving around. There's no humans at all. Everything is automated, and you're supposed to be speaking as if you're speaking to people. I've had this experience. So I tried this. So I realized, in every office you have 6-7 people working. They're not on top of each other, but everyone's around. You interact, and one person's bad mood, of course, is very easy to destroy everybody that day. So I decided to try a little so-called, let's call it a self-awareness trick. You could try it out. It actually worked. It worked simply to diffuse matters, and at least everyone got a good laugh. So I drew up on a piece of paper. You have, even if you're not a big artist, you draw a face, right? A face is a circle. You make a circle. We all can draw eyes. You just make 2 dots, then eyebrows, and a line for a nose, and another line, what is that? A horizontal line. Is that vertical? All right. A vertical line for a nose, a horizontal line for a mouth, 2 horizontal lines for the eyebrows, and the 2 dots under the eyebrows. Okay, you got a face. But without not much effort, you can make the eyebrows, facing like this, which is usually a sign of an angry person. Or you can make the eyebrows face like that, which is more like a whimsical, quizzical, look. And then you can make the mouth turned upside down, like a upside down U. And then it's very glum and sad, or a smile. So I decided I ended up making 9 different types of faces. One with the eyebrows straight, one with the eyebrows like that, one with the eyebrows up, with the mouth like this. You figure out there's 9 configurations. And I wrote numbers 1 to 9, and I put it by the door that anyone comes into the office, as soon as you walk in, circle the face what mood you are in today. And there's the angry mood, there's the pleasant mood, there's the neutral mood, there's the cruel mood. There's the different faces, and circle the thing and pass it around to everyone, so we don't have to start guessing what kind of mood you're in and so on. And it was hilarious. Everyone did it, and it worked because first of all, it made you think. Here, you just walk in and you think everybody's here, so you could just hang your laundry, and everybody's ready to just tolerate whatever your mood you're in. And here, people they have to think about it. So it was quite interesting. You could try it out. It's actually a good, I don't know, should we patent it? What do you think? Okay, so it's definitely get a laugh. Point is that we are definitely social creatures. Facebook has proven that quite well. 700 million, whatever. How many friends do you have? They're not even friends. But so we're definitely social creatures. We need each other. We're dependent on each other. We react to each other. We don't like criticism. We like praise. We like to look good, and so on. The question, however, is if you are a victim, a social victim, meaning that your life is defined by everybody around you. And that, unfortunately, is a direct result of whether you have the inner tools to define yourself. And it's really 2 options. You either define yourself or your environment, and the people around you will define you. A healthy nest, a healthy home, creates the nurturing that helps you cultivate confidence in your tools. So when you finally go out and you face people who may not respect you, or have their own issues, or you have a secure tool chest. When you don't have that healthy nest, what happens is you go out into the world, you're thrust into a world without real defenses, which often is the reason that many of us, very nice people, develop very angry tools. I sometimes meet people and I see they're really angry, they have a lot of, and it's very unpleasant. How people react, how, sometimes someone cuts in front of you in a line. You see some people just take other people go crazy. That becomes their whole, like road rage. And it's a direct result, because if you don't have those inner tools, what happens is you start compensating, and the only way to protect yourself is becoming an angrier person. It's interesting, you'll find some of the most bitter people you know are very sweet people, but their sweetness is completely concealed now. They locked it in a fortress because they got hurt. It's not even intentional. It's just that you develop, but you can't develop tools when you're 20 years old. You should have developed them when you were 2 years old. To protect yourself, you wouldn't need to be so mean when you're 20 or 30 or whatever the age is. Now this doesn't justify, I'm not giving any excuse to anyone to be mean, but it's just a way of understanding people, and understanding there's always more that meets the eye. Whenever I see anyone very angry, very mean, or a situation they're very mean-spirited, I'm not trying to say I look for the silver lining, but it's always a sign there's something going on. There's a reason they developed that mean. They weren't born that way. They developed it. They may have picked it up from their mothers and fathers. As much as we don't like to be a bit like our parents, as the years roll on, you start looking like them more and more. So be careful what you don't want, because a leopard doesn't change its stripe, its spot so quickly. However, the bottom line is that we are capable of building really healthy nests. And I want to wish you all the presence of mind, the fortitude to build beautiful nests, starting from your own home, starting from a nest for yourself, finding your proper soulmate, and building a home where you can radiate from within, and you don't have to constantly be on the run. Just as I said earlier, not just a shelter from the storm, not just a shelter from the negative forces, but actually a house of light. That a home is not just a place where you don't have darkness. You have a place to run to and lock your door because no one can enter. That's more of a fortress. A real home is a place that radiates light. That not only doesn't it absorb the forces that are outside of the home, it actually brings light to the world around you. A home where you have guests, where you have a class from time to time, where people come and talk and feel comfortable, don't feel judged. This is the power that each of us has, and it's not as complicated as it sounds, if you really think about it. It's complicated when you're in the middle of the war and bullets are flying back and forth, metaphorically speaking. So you cannot really build anything when you're busy fighting. You have to be able to step back. But that's really what it comes down to. So it's not just about people want to have relationships, find the right soulmate, get married. You don't just get married and then go back to the same war zone you were the day before you were married. Marriage means also creating a new type of environment. That there's a place of peace in this world, in your little world. You have a real nest with your husband or wife, the children that God blesses you with, the friends you invite in. So it's more than just a commitment of two people. Okay, now we're with each other, it's formal and so on. It's a commitment to building something together that is a nest. Much more than just two people joining forces. It's building something. And when you build a nest, it affects those around us. Obviously our children, but even our guests and anyone that enters that environment. So I bless you all, wish you all that you should have homes like that, nests like that people come in, they go away feeling warmer, brighter, more confident, more hopeful. And that's a pretty, not difficult thing to measure. You see how they go in? They come in with a smile and they leave with a scowl. You know that there's a lot to be desired. If they come in with a scowl and leave with a smile, you have achieved something. If they come with a smile and leave with a laugh, is even better. I don't mean obviously in the technical sense of it. You can't always measure it that way. But you could pretty much tell. You go to a party, you right away know if the hosts are in a bad, sour mood, because it spills right down to everybody. The staff become that way, the waiters become, everybody becomes bitter. It all comes from the top. And when the top is peaceful, And you can sense it. You don't even have to look. You can sense. You feel heaviness in the room. You feel lightness. So, what should I tell you, my friends? I wish upon you all to bring much lightness to yourself and to the world around us. Thanksgiving is a time to saying thanks. It's a beautiful acknowledging our gifts, our blessings. It's not a per se Jewish holiday, but it's not an anti-Jewish holiday either. It means it's in the Jewish spirit. I think when the pilgrims came here and they said Thanksgiving, it's a biblical concept to thank God for gifts, for blessings. They had things they had to thank. Today it has become the Macy's Day Parade, the balloons, and the sales. What do they call it? Black Friday? The name makes me like Black Friday. Cyber what? Cyber Monday, Black Friday. Okay, cyber. Why would they call it black? It sounds so dark. I mean, why? Because they start shopping when it's dark? Oh, I thought it was because people get up in the black and the dark to go shopping. Okay, very good. They go into black. That's why it's called Black Friday. God Almighty. They should call it blue. It's a much nicer color. Black is like what you wear at the funerals, Fine. As long as when they go into the black, they write in the bottom, "There's nothing but God." I'm fine with that. That's fine. So things to think about. Hanukkah coming around the corner is also family time, home time, and wherever you are in your life, there's definitely something you can do to make some progress, to move to a place of a more healthier nesting ground, healthier home. Some I know that have recently married are building their home and nest, and some of you will, I'm sure, very soon find your soulmate. So maybe it's a good opportunity now to adjust or shift something in the mindset that allows us to think differently. And when you think differently, you usually begin to act differently, ultimately. So, with that being said, an honor to nest with you, if I may say that, and spend some nurturing time together, some warm time. I hope you all leave here with a bigger smile than when you came in. Lovell, you too. Okay? I know you're happy because the video is going, yeah? Okay. Yes, I already did, by the way. I said. The people here don't know the difference, what the technology, but it's a big thing because we were having a lot of aggravation because people were complaining the class was going down, going up, and stuff like that. So, for all those that have complained, I'd appreciate that you send us a compliment tomorrow. And no, I mean, our job is to make sure it works. Thank God it's stable, and we're creating, I guess, a stable nest environment for the online experience as well. So, as always, it's a great honor to speak to you. It's beautiful to see such dignified souls traveling on this earth like yourselves, and please live up to all your potential for which you were sent here to this earth. And please see me, myself. Me and myself is the same. So I was going to say me, myself, and I. Please see me as a resource, a friend in this journey. Any way we can help, myself, Meaningful Life Center, our team. We're here in every possible way. And I hope the feelings are reciprocal, mutual. And as I usually conclude, Philip's class will not be tomorrow night because of Thanksgiving. But we'll resume next Thursday. But I will be here next Wednesday, as usual. What else can I add? If you have not left your email address, please do so. It's a good way for us to stay in touch. I send out a weekly email, and I would love to be able to communicate with you. And I really seriously mean it. If you need anything, any questions, any assistance in any way, please see us as friends. Friends in, I'm not going to say friends in arms. That's not consistent with the message tonight. Friends in peace. Okay. And everyone have a very pleasant night, a very pleasant week, and a very good Thanksgiving. Thank you so much.